Thanks from you.
Good, thank God. Nice to see you.
Good.
Okay, guys, should we begin? If you're good with that, then we can get going. I just want to. Okay, if everyone can mute themselves, then off we go. Okay. So good evening again, just to say good evening formally as part of the shir. So the last we spoke about one and really ultimately when we think about what SHOVAVIM is, SHOVAVIM really is the process of beginning a space of growth. It starts with Parashat Shmot, and then it goes on for the next few weeks until Mishpatim. And the reason why it's at this time of the year is that within these parashas, that we have all these stories of all the different things that are happening with Am Yisrael, is that within these parashas there are so many important and fundamental lessons that we can learn about our own personal growth. And sometimes we find them not in the big words and in the big things and in the obvious things, but sometimes it's just in the smallest spaces that we can find. And perhaps we can start that and understanding this week's parsha. This week's parsha is Parshat Bo. I know, Peter, it's an important parsha for you. It's Lance's bar mitzvah parsha, so mazel tov again. It's an important parsha. It's a special parsha. It contains the first mitzvah of given to Bnei Yisrael, but it also contains what seems to be the most simple word. It starts off Bo El Paro, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to Bo El Paro. Bo El Paro ki ani ichbareti et libo. And the word Bo El Paro, if you translate the word Bo doesn't, we translate, in the translations, it says, go to Paro. But the word Bo does not mean go. The word Bo means to come. And I saw a beautiful idea, and that is that when the Torah says Bo El Paro, what the Torah really is saying is Bo is to come to yourself, come into being the best that you can be in order that you can now approach Paro on a different level. And that's really one of the great learnings of the Parsha of Bo. Bo El Paro, we all have our Paros in our lives. Paro is that adversary, Paro is that fear, Paro is that thing that stops us from doing the things that we want to do. We have, in order to be able to achieve those things, we have to Bo El Paro. We have to find within ourselves the strength to take that space and to come in with strength and with power. And it's quite an amazing thing where the Torah describes Bo El Paro, that go to Paro and tell him that, you know what, this is it. I'm going to be bringing in these makot that are ultimately going to destroy the land. And once he hears that, we know that everything starts to change in terms of the attitude of the people towards what has been going on. They try and push them out. Ultimately, they call back Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron to say, come, what do you really want? Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron say, we want to go with everybody, the whole of Am Yisrael and all the flocks and everything. We just want to go serve Hashem. And Paro says, not a chance. There's no chance I'm leaving. You can go with the adults. Why? Because he doesn't understand that personal growth is a growth point not only for adults, an adult growth point for children, for older people, for younger people, you name it. The Bo is the most important part, Bo coming to ourselves. And having had that as introduction, what I'd like to look at is a couple of lessons that we can learn during this period of time to say, how can we make ourselves really the best that we can make ourselves? And to start off, I'd like to share with you an Avot de Rabbi Natan. What I'll do is I'll share my screen for those who'd like to see it, so that we can share it and learn it through together. Guys, are you able to see Avot de Rabbi Natan? Or not? Can you see it? Are you able to see it? Okay. Okay, so says Avos Rabbi Natan. B'shlosha dvarim shina kadosh baruch hu b'nei adam. Hashem makes people different from one another. We all know that we're all different. We all know that we all have different ways of things and doing things. But the Avos Rabbi Natan says that there are three ways that people are different from one another. V'elohein, b'kol, b'ne'ima, v'mareh. What are those three things? In the voice, in our call, in the sound that we are able to take and project from our bodies. B'ne'ima, like we say anims mirot. The idea is the manner in which we portray ourselves. They translate it here as in disposition, and uvamare, and the way we appear. So the things, one call, which comes from an internal force that's coming from inside, ne'ima, like the midot that we have, the way we behave, and mare is an external thing. So now says Avos Rabbi Natan, Kaitzad, like, why do you do this? What was the purpose of making people different? Melamed shina kadosh baruch hu kolot b'nei adam ze mizeh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the voices of the people different from one another. He said, you know why? Because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu had not made different voices of people, that people's voices, you know exactly who you're talking to sometimes by the voice, especially nowadays. You walk around the street, you see somebody, you don't really recognize their face, but you hear their voice through the mask. You know exactly who it is, right? Why? Because there would be so much illicit relationships, illicit, inappropriate sexual relationships. Why? Because a person could just leave his house, and then what? Because what would happen? And one man can go out, let's say he goes out early in the morning, the wife is still sleeping, this guy would come back in, he would whisper sweet nothings to his wife, and he'd have an illicit relationship with her. Why? Because his voice would be the same. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made their voices different. This voice doesn't sound like this voice. Now, if you remember, in the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moshe Rabbeinu sees this Egyptian man hitting this Jewish man, and Moshe Rabbeinu goes up and he tries to stop it, and ultimately he kills the Egyptian, as we all know, and he buries him in the sand. One of the Midrashim tells us what was the issue, what were they arguing about? Because it's in that what that argument is that's so important for us to understand that this is all about this Midrash that we've just learned. Why? Because the Midrash tells us that what they were arguing about was that this man was pulled out of his home in the middle of the night to go and do some work. Why did that happen? Because the Egyptian had a crush on this man's wife. And so what the Egyptian does is that the Egyptian goes and he sleeps or rapes this woman, this Jewish woman, and the man comes back from the work that he had done, and he arrives back and he says, what have you done? And the Egyptian starts beating him. Okay, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu sees. So Moshe Rabbeinu sees that there is the situation where one man can be confused with another, if indeed it was rape, or maybe it was just that she didn't realize who it was. Maybe didn't say anything, but kolot, when verses' voices are all the same, that's a problem. Now, we understand an important factor in this whole story is that when Yitzchak is about to give Yaakov the bracha, one of the things he points out is Hakol kol Yaakov vayedai mida Esav, that the voice is the voice of Yaakov. When we speak about voices being different, it's not only on an individual level, but the voice of Yaakov, the voice of Jewish people, should also be a voice that is different, because part of this concept of Shovavim and part of the concept of growth is understanding where our boundaries are. And our voices, Am Yisrael, needs to be different, because as a voice that is different, when our voices are different, when we're speaking about values, when we're speaking about integrity, when we're speaking about things that in this world that we live in are not very prevalent, then we can understand that will also ensure that certain things and inappropriate behaviors don't happen within our communities as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing, says the Midrash in Avos Rabbi Natan, B'ne'ima, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made dispositions different. This is gewaldig. This is geschmack. Why? Keitzad. How do you know? How is it that we see that Hashem made the people's dispositions different? Because if Hashem had not changed the different dispositions of people, people would be jealous of one another. Because if everybody's the same, then I'm going to say, well, you've got a better this than I have, and etc., etc. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu changes people's dispositions, that I'm not going to be jealous of you because I have a certain unbelievable strength that you don't have. And it's so important that often we forget to look at our own strengths. We forget to look at our own power, at the values that we are able to bring into the world. And we always look at others. And really what this Midrash is saying is that if we are able to see how different and how special and how important that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given me, then I don't have to look to others to find other things. Yes, of course, I can learn from other people. But ultimately, the most important thing is to recognize my strengths of a Mare. And why is it so important that HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed people's appearances? And we understand, we are taught that Yitzchak and Abraham looked the same, which is quite an amazing concept. And we know that many children look similar to their fathers or to their parents. But ultimately, all of us in the shir today, we all look different. Why? Why is it so important? So says Avos the Rabbi Nassan, Melamed Sheshina HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mare Bnei Adam Zeh Mizeh She'il Malei, because if he didn't do it, then what? She'il Malei Lo Shina HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mare Panim Zeh Mizeh Lo Hayu Banot Yisrael Makirot Et Ba'alein. You know why we have to look different? Because if we don't look different, we can't recognize each other. And the Jewish women would not recognize their husbands. And the males would not recognize their wives. And then people wouldn't know who was what. Now, why is it so important? Because again, it's about boundaries. We have boundaries in our relationships. We have boundaries in the people that we know. And once again, that's an issue in Mitzrayim. How do we know that Mitzrayim was decimated by such incredible amount of znut, of inappropriate sexual behavior? Because we're told that at the Makat Bechorot, at the killing of the firstborn, there were many firstborns in each home. Why was that? Because it was the firstborn of the father, not the firstborn of the mother, because the men and the women were busy being with each other willy-nilly, and therefore there were no boundaries. And so therefore, one of the lessons that we are seeing is the importance of boundaries. And but what are we supposed to do? How do we get to find those boundaries? How do we get to really build around those boundaries? And I'd just like to share with you a couple of thoughts that I have. And one of them is from the introduction to the Chokhmat Adam. Now, the Chokhmat Adam is this incredible halachic work. It's written by Aaron Danziger. He was a massive Talmid Chochem. He's the author of the Chaya Adam as well. But these are fundamental halachic sfarim. But you have to understand that he wasn't a Rov in a city. He wasn't a Rosh Hashiva. He was actually a businessman. He came from a line and lines of incredible Talmidei Chachamim. But he himself was a businessman. And what he realized is that people around him found it very difficult to access as many of us do, difficult to access like the fundamental Sfarim. How do you access Shulchan Aruch, which is talking about complex ideas in kashrut, where we don't really even have like the basis of it? How do you understand the complex ideas of ribbit, of lending money with interest, where we don't even have the fundamental understandings? And so therefore what he did is he wrote this book, the Chai Adam and then the Chokhmat Adam, which in order to give people access to the complex ideas in a much more simple way. And he writes this book, and he had a whole theory and a vision around it. And then he says this, and I think this is an incredible display of humility and a display of insight into people. He says, "V'hinei yadati." He says, "Now I know. Ki yitlachashu alai." There are many people who speak lashon hara about me. Vayomru agam shaul b'neviim, and they say, "Oh, this guy's also one of the great prophets." In other words, they mock him. Frankfurt, that's the Pepe, Leipzig. They say, "We know this man. He's a tradesman. He goes to Frankfurt. He goes to Leipzig for how many? For more than 15 years. V'torato eimat nasit. What it could have happened to his Torah. V'torah he'ida loy ma'avar ve'veliyam who she'ena metzuya loy betagrin v'lo b'schorin. He quotes from the Gemara, and the Gemara says that people who are tradespeople, people who spend their lives working hard, they're not going to be so proficient in Torah. And what he starts to highlight, and so importantly, is that the only reason he works is because he needs to make a living. That's the only reason he works. He's not working to make himself wealthy. Why is he not working to make himself wealthy? And he quotes an incredible dream. He says he had his grandfather had a dream. And in this dream, his great-grandmother came to his grandfather and said, you must understand, I've just been in Shamayim, and in Shamayim there's been a gezerah, a decree. And the decree is that our family will never be wealthy. That's it. It would be nice to know that sometimes, if that's the decree, or we just don't know what we're doing in our businesses. But, we will never be a wealthy family. And the only reason you've got to work is you've got to do a certain level of hishtadlus, a certain amount of work just to get the money that you need. But you've got to make sure you don't forget your Torah. And so what he starts to explain is how important it is for us who are trying to grow in the way that we're trying to grow, even though we're working and even though we're busy and even though we're involved with children and grandchildren and you name it, community issues, nonetheless, we have to make sure that we are learning. And he says, it's an amazing thing. He says, I'm learning so much, but I want you to know that one thing I never ever left is I never left my learning. And what did I do? And he says, what I did is that I always made sure that I just want to find it here. Sorry, that here we go. He says, I can tell you now, the sochrim, the merchants who I deal with, they will bear testimony. Even during the time of my travels to Leipzig. Like, what do we do when we travel? What do we do when we're sitting in our cars? Alavai, we could sit in our cars and travel to normal places as we've done before. What do we do when we have extra time? I never, what I took with me, I always took a book. I took a Gemara, Mikra, Mishnah, something. Even at the most difficult times, I always learned B'chol Yom Daf V'chetzi Gemara. Sure. I learned a daf and a half of Gemara, Chutz Mishnayos, and I also learned Mishnayos. V'chayei Rosh She'ein Ani Kosev Zos Liga'al. He says, I want to tell you, I'm not trying to show off. Kimani, mechayai, who am I? I'm a nothing. And in actual fact, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that if you've learned a lot of Torah, you mustn't give yourself any credit, because that's the purpose of being born. V'kol shekain, how much more so? Milmod ma'at, the ma'at asher ki'im mechuyev b'zeh. At least learn a little bit, because that's how much we have to learn. And what he's really saying is that in order for us to maintain our growth, to maintain our connection, to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made us different for a real purpose, what we have to do, we have to make sure and ensure that we learn. And then the question is if we have to make sure that we learn, the question is that what are we supposed to be doing in our lives? What are the things, what are the actions that we should try and do in order to achieve different things? We all want to become Talmidei Chachamim, we all want to become wealthy, we all want to have good families, we all want to have all of these different things. What should we be doing? Because we've spoken now about the importance of learning Torah. We've spoken that part of personal growth is learning Torah. But there's another part of personal growth that we sometimes forget. And the Gemara in Nida, right at the end, it's right at the end of Shas, you're going through the whole of Shas, the Gemara now says the following. The sage, so there are three matters of behavior of Adam that a person should do to become wise. Right? This is what the great sages of Alexandria came and they asked Rabbi Yoshua, what should we do to become wise? So Amar Lahen, Yarbe Yeshiva, you know how you become wise? You got to learn. If you're not learning, if you're not spending your time engaging in intellectual and cerebral growth, you're obviously not going to learn. So how do you do that? You've got to minimize your trading. So Amru Harbe Asukain V'lo Ilam. So the Alexandria sages say to him, many people did that. Many people have sat for hours and hours and hours and hours and learning, and it hasn't helped them. They haven't become great Talmidei Chachamim. Right? We know people like that. People can sit And some people are great academics and some aren't. So they're learning, but they're not achieving anything. So he comes and he says to them, well, you know what? There's something missing. You have to daven. Why? Every single day we daven. And one of the things we say is, Hanotein la ya'ev. Koach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives koach to those who are tired. We say, Chonein hadat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us dat. He gives us the ability to think. So the question is, really, do we really believe that? Because if we really believe that, then our tefillah would be a completely different tefillah. As he says, Ki Hashem yitain chokhmah mipiv datu tvuna. We say it every day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the chokhmah. From him we get the knowledge. From him we get the ability to discern and to understand things. So we've got to daven. We also have to learn. But maybe it's not enough just to do our own ishtadlus. We also have to do something else. The Gemara carries on a little bit later and says, Ma yaseh adam v'yitasher. What should a person do and become wealthy? Amar lehem yarbe b'schoira. So you know what you should do? You've got to work. And you've got to have faith and faithful business, proper, trustworthy businesses. So Amrullah, they said to him, we all know of people who are really have incredible integrity, people who work very hard. They don't become wealthy. So how come you have others? It's such an unbelievable thing that there's some people who, I've had clients. I remember in Cape Town, I had a client. He was incredibly successful, and he called me in to help him with some of his business process and his business strategy. And as we started talking, I realized that this guy's become like kind of successful in spite of himself. So how does it work that certain people are like, they don't have everything in place that they should? They're not the most honest of this, but they're becoming all this wealthy, whatever the case is. When other people are working so hard and they're trying so hard and everything in place, but it's not working. So that's what the sage of Alexandria asked. So come along, Rabbi Yeshua, and he says, you know what? You're right. You have to remember, you've got to go daven. You've got to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give you mercy, because he's the one from where wealth wealth comes. So it comes along the Gemara and says, "My kamash malan." So what do we learn from this? Life is it. You can't have this and that. Life is about a balance, and it's that balance that is so important for our personal growth. It can't only be looking to Shamayim and saying, "Well, everything's in Hashem's hands," says the Gemara, and at the same time, you can't say everything's in my hands. But in order for us to achieve that growth, in order for us to recognize what we can do with the differences that we have, that we spoke about right at the beginning, what do we have to do? We've got to find that balance. And I believe very strongly that balance is the most difficult thing in the world. Because it's in that balance that we always suffer. People say, you have to have a work-life balance. What does a work-life balance mean? Some people have to work more and have to live more. I don't know. Everybody's got their own world. It's not a 50-50. It's a balance for each person needs to have ha below ha. Ha baha. We all have to have this balance. And when we have that balance, then we can understand the power of tefillah. And that's why we see in the next source where Yaakov says to Yosef, I'm giving you one thing more than I'm giving to any of your other brothers. And this is what I took from the Emoris. I took it with my cherev, with my sword, and v'kashti, and with my bow, and comes along Onkelos. Now, Onkelos is an amazing character. In literature, the translation, he is an amazing story told about Onkelos, connected to Torah. He becomes a Fruman, and as he becomes frummer and frummer, his uncle, who happens to be the Caesar of Rome, is very upset about this. So because he's so upset about us, what he does is he sends these soldiers to go and bring Onkelos to him so that he can sort him out and bring him back onto the path of Roman God of Roman worship. So that the soldiers go to call Onkelos, and they go to call Onkelos, and Onkelos, as they walk out the door, they say to Onkelos, "What's that thing on the door?" And he explains the mezuzah, and that's it. In one line, all the Roman soldiers convert. And this happens a couple of times. And this man is so powerful that in a few words, he's able to really just get to the essence of what it means to be a Yid, and ultimately he can't be brought back to the Roman Caesar, and ultimately he becomes Onkelos, the man who translates the Torah into Aramaic, and in doing so, he opens up much of the Torah for the Hamon Am, for the general populace of that time. Now, what he says is that we understand what is it that Yaakov used to become the person that he became. It wasn't his strength and it wasn't his power, but rather it was Charbi and Kashti, it was his sword and his bow, and says Onkelos here in these incredible words, Betzaluti v'va'uti. Through my davening, his success, sometimes we forget, his success was really about his tefillah. And I heard from Rabbi Rosner, Shalom Rosner, he quotes from others, but he says, basically, don't ever expect success in anything. We don't daven. We want people to be well. We've got to daven for them. We want to be of success. We've got to daven. And that's part of our personal growth during this time of the weeks of Shovavim. But there's one more aspect. There's one more aspect of the boundaries of the growth, and that's what I'd like to discuss just quickly with you, that the Torah tells us at the end of Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu is now giving this whole speech to Bnei Yisrael. And he's giving the speech to Bnei Yisrael, he's about to die, and it's very hard. And he says here, Vayitaber Adonai bi lema'anchem. Hashem was very upset with me because he wouldn't listen to me. And Hashem said to me, Rav lach al toisif. He said to me, stop speaking about davar elai oid b'davar zeh. Stop speaking about this matter. What's the matter? The matter is Moshe Rabbeinu wants to go into Eretz Yisrael. He wants to be together with the people. So Hashem says, I don't want you to speak about it anymore, but I'll give you a little glimpse. Alei Rosh HaPisgah, go up to the summit of Pisgah, v'sai necha, and lift up your eyes and have a look. Yam in all different directions. And see with your eyes, because I'm not going to let you cross it. So isn't this a bit unfair? Here's this incredible Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is one cross over to the land of Israel, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu teases him. He says, oh, look, I'll let you see it, but I won't let you go into it. So Chazal explained it wasn't a tease. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need to go to Tel Aviv and go hang out in the clubs. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to have an imprint of the Holy Land in his neshama. How do you get an imprint of something into our neshamas? Says the Torah, Ra'ei beinecha, see with your eyes. We see so many things, and the reality is we never forget them. And that's why when we see tzitzit, it says, V'haya lachem letzitzit, or item oto. What are we supposed to look at? We must look at the tzitzit. Item oto zachartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam. You've got to look at the tzitzit, and when you through looking at the tzitzit, you'll remember. What does it mean you'll remember? How can you remember if you look at tzitzit? Because if we are able to look at something and put that imprint into our mind, then at all points in time that we're trying to live our lives in the way we live them, that imprint will always come back into our psyche when we've got mitzvot to do. And we'll not only remember the mitzvahs, we'll do the mitzvahs. You won't go after your heart and after your eyes. We'll see tzitzit will be the thing that will drive the things that we do, not the other things. We all know that we chase after so much that we see with our eyes. In order that we'll remember, do all the mitzvot. Ultimately, the purpose of everything, and the purpose of the Shovavim week, and the purpose of everything that we're trying to achieve in this very, very complicated world. I mean, we're living in such a difficult time, is to try and achieve Kedoshim Elohechem. So comes along the Netziv Ha'emek Davar, and he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that we need to make these tchelet, because the tchelet reminds us to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'az yitem kedoshim, and he says the af al gav, the adam mitkadesh atzmo b'mash mefurash legvoa, that even though a person tries to sanctify himself from in that which is mufrash legvoa, which is dedicates to on high to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'hu merkava l'shchina, and he becomes a merkava l'shchina, he becomes a chariot, or he becomes representative of Hashem in this world. Mikol makom, nonetheless, eina merutzeh l'shamayim, it's not enough for us just to try and achieve greatness in terms of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The greatness that we connect is what? Ad sheyeh oseh hamitzvah bizmano. The way we become real kadosh, the way we become real connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way we become the true ambassadors of Hashem in this world, is by doing the mitzvot in the correct time. As tiyeh kedushato Elohim. Then kedusha is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not to ourselves. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't remove anything from such a person, won't prevent anything coming from such a person. Our question is, and that's ultimately what we have to ask ourselves, is that when we bore El Paro, as we spoke about right at the beginning, are we doing it for ourselves, or are we doing it Vitem Kadoshim Elohechem? Are we doing it to become sanctified, to become Kadosh Le'Elohechem, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be those ambassadors and representatives of Hashem in this world? And ultimately, that, I think, is what these few weeks of Shovavim are all about. They start off with Shmot, which is the establishment of the Jewish people. And they end off with the Parsha of Mishpatim, which is the dinim, which are the laws that deal basically with how are we supposed to conduct ourselves in our normal business environments. Because when we conduct ourselves in our normal business environments as part of Am Yisrael, as understanding that that's who we are representing, then we are Hayitim Kadoshim Le'Elohechem. We become sanctified towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And please God, that should be our goal. Please God, that's what these few weeks should enable and give us the ability to do, is to sanctify ourselves towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that way, we truly can be this Or LaGoyim, this light unto the nations that we strive to be. It's not an easy time for all of us. I saw one of our congregants put a thing on Facebook about minyanim. People are having illicit minyanim, whatever you want to call them. All those things become such things that whilst they kadoshim lelohechem, Rav Shechter, and on this we'll finish, Shechter said the most beautiful thing. He said, ultimately, the most important value that we have is the value of human life, because that enables us to do what we need to do, to become kadoshim lelohechem. But if we are now going to become obsessive about minyan, become obsessive about saying kaddish in a minyan, become obsessive about making tzibur all over, and that becomes our driving forces, then what we're doing is that there's no balance in our ability to discern what is right and what is wrong. Ultimately, our balance comes understanding that we have to have a ben adam l'chaveri, we have to have a ben adam l'makom, we have to work to find that balance. And it's in that balance that's yitim kadoshim le'Elohechem. It's in that balance that we can bore El Paro in a profound way. On that, I'd like to stop. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I just hope that we are able to take from this the importance of our personal growth, the importance of finding the difference within ourselves, and ultimately, and most importantly, doing the things that we do not for ourselves, but to be that person that we're supposed to be in this world, to bring sanctity and to bring Kedusha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you for listening. It's been great.
Shika, thank you.
Thanks. God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks.